Okay, ready?
Yes.
So, welcome for everybody who's joining us online. We have the honor to talk to the author of that textbook. Matt Miller is here. He's going to talk about his book, and he just came back from presenting at ISTE, and he's been really busy this summer. And so he's going to talk about his book, and then we're going to ask him some questions. So here you go. Go ahead.
Okay. So you want me to talk about the book? Is that what it is, or?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Ditch That Textbook kind of came from the idea that came from soybean fields here in Indiana. And so I'm teaching, and I'm starting to come to this realization that in my Spanish classroom, my kids can't speak Spanish, which is a problem. And so it really sunk into me this one day. I'm at a Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting, and where I was one of the sponsors, and they're doing this game where they're supposed to say something in a foreign language. Well, that was one of the challenges anyway, that they could get points for it. And so I'm looking out and I'm going, okay, you guys have all got this. You can do this. And so I'm looking out around the crowd, and they're like, okay, who can say something in a foreign language? And it was like silent, nothing, got nothing. And so this one girl finally raises her hand, and so we call on her, and she says something in Hungarian instead of Spanish. And so at that point, I knew that something really had to change, because if they couldn't even say anything there in Spanish, then we were in really trouble. And so from there, I basically quit using my textbooks and started doing other things. Like we started talking in slide ads that actually had that vocabulary in it. And so anyway, that's kind of the story of how this all came to happen. And then in the book, I talk about a couple of different things. One is why we should go digital. Just the simple fact that it can make your class more efficient, and it can open up your class to lots of different things that you couldn't do before. I talk about how whenever kids show up with one of these in their class, that it gives you the opportunity to create, for example, these video projects that used to take, also a Ditch That Mindset section, where it talks about how we kind of need to change our attitude and the way that we think about education in general, just because the whole education landscape is really shifting with technology. And so I think as teachers, the way that we teach kids, but also the way that we do our craft, the way that we live our teaching lives, I think kind of needs to change. And then there's also a fourth section called Ditch That Curriculum that just kind of talks about my way of getting a grasp on my curriculum in light of all of the changes that I made. So that's kind of the, in a nutshell, version of the whole thing, I think.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question?
I guess I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. As far as getting teachers out of the mindset, and I like the chapter, I just read the book, but being the gatekeepers of information and allowing that, to take that risk, that it's really hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I've found that, to be brutally honest, there are some teachers, and I've worked with a lot of different teachers. There are some teachers that will not take risks. They just won't. They've had years and years and years built up in their minds that it's not worth taking the risk, or I'm too tired, or I'm too not going to do it. But there are a lot of them that I think will. And for me is a huge thing. Whenever people can see it, especially whenever it's people that they know, people that they're familiar with, and they can see where they've taken risks and where it's paid off, that can kind of chip away at it little by little. And I think secondly, and maybe even bigger than this, is just making sure that an atmosphere of risk taking is permissible, is permitted in the organization. And I think leaders have a huge role in that, but also I think teachers can have a role in that too, of taking risk, of showing how it's paid off, and then showing that it's not going to like destroy your career, or it's not going to destroy your relationships with students, and that those things are worth doing. So that's kind of my take on that. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Do you have any tips now on successful one-to-one implementation?
On successful one-to-one implementation, yes, definitely. The first thing that comes to mind is don't try to do too much. I know it kind of makes me think of whenever we go to these professional development sessions, or if I go to a conference and I start to get all of these ideas in my head. It's like I'll go to a conference and I'll see 14 new apps. Sometimes I'll go and I'll think, well, this person's doing this and this person's doing this and this person's doing this. And I just hope I'm not doing a disservice to my students by not doing all those things. And actually, you would be doing a disservice if you tried to cram all of those things in. And so I think in one-to-one implementation, it is so important to own a couple of things instead of trying to do the second thing. One is don't do too much at first. And the second thing is patience, in that the kids are getting used to this just like you're getting used to it, into this one-to-one. And so I think of it, the way that kids pick up on things and the way that things finally get smooth in your one-to-one classroom is kind of like pushing a boulder, I think. You got this enormous boulder and it's not moving anywhere. There is no momentum. But then you kind of lean on it with your shoulder and you start pushing on it, rolling down the hill. And I found for me that whenever I give students a new tool or a new idea, even if it doesn't work at first, you can't get the kids get it, and then it's off to the races.
Thank you. In chapter 2, you talked about student K, I think was her name.
Yes.
Who would not really be engaged or participate in your class, and you started using back channel, which actually we just learned about that yesterday. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of tell us the story?
Yes. Yeah, I'll be glad to. Okay. So Kay, I had her in class for a couple of years. In my little school district, first of all, I was the entire world languages department. I mean, I was the one world languages. It made department meetings really easy, by the way. And so, so I had all levels of Spanish, from Spanish 1 all the way up to our advanced placement Spanish. And so what's neat about that is it meant that I got kids year after year after year sometimes. And with Kay, I had her 2 years in a row. I had her in Spanish 1 for 1 year, and then the second kid. I mean, I don't like to characterize, but that's sort of the outward appearance, at least, is that, you know, she dressed in kind of dark clothing, dark makeup. And she was always real quiet, just never had a smile on her face, never saw her laugh about anything. Got into fights in the hallway sometimes. I mean, but I could see in class, and what little conversations I picked up with her with other kids, because she was real, you know, sort of quiet and no expression, but I knew something was going on up there. And so, so I really wanted to try to figure that out, really wanted to tap into that. And I didn't have, honestly, I hate to say this, but I didn't have very much success. I never really developed a relationship with her. But one day I got through to her. Well, a couple of days whenever we did this. And because she never participated in class. And I think that I even wrote in the book, correct me if I'm wrong, that she was supposed to do a group project. And yeah, and she was going to basically take the whole rest of the group down in flames and say, I'm not going to present. And I wish that I had handled all of that a little bit differently. But so anyway, her hand in class to answer. Even if I called on her and just asked her point blank to answer a question, I would have gotten something really short, just enough to dismiss me so she didn't have to answer. But you get her onto this Today's Meet back channel, and I think that it's enough like social media or texting or, you know, some of those digital means of communication that kids are comfortable with. Not to say that those are the best and the most perfect forms of communication, but it's something that they're comfortable with. And they have a sort of a low level of anxiety on using them. And so I started asking questions, just throwing questions. It was sort of the strangest class because we just talked over Today's Meet. We didn't even talk verbally in class. I turned on some music and kids all just typed at their desk. And what happened was, and you don't have to do it exactly like that, but what happened was Kay started to give answers to these questions, and they were really insightful answers. I wish I remember some of the things that she said, but they were just, I mean, the kinds of things that I knew were up there, but I'd never been able to really see, at least in an academic setting. And so that was just a huge success, I think, was it allowed her to participate. It allowed her to get engaged in the class, but it made her able to do it in a way that didn't make.
Okay. And in chapter 20, you talk about how technology is a right, not a privilege. And you talked about your class from hell. And how you end up, kind of taking away the technology and realize that's really not, you would not take away a textbook, and therefore you should not. So.
Yeah. What my hope was that they didn't realize that I mean, they knew that I struggled, or that things didn't go exactly as for me, it was ninth graders. It was 15-year-olds, mostly boys. They'd just gotten back from lunch and they were wild. And it was just hard to rein them in. And I had a couple of big personalities that could really sway the entire class. And so just trying to harness all that was hard. And I had to blow up in my face a couple of times. I tried to do just a little simple Today's Meet back channel for a couple of things. And I had, when the very moment that it popped up on the screen, I had 3 or 4 kids that just started typing ridiculous things in just because they could, because that's how they had used this kind of technology before. They use it. These particular kids used it on social media, and they're used to typing little short messages in and trying to get a reaction out of their friends. And so they thought, okay, this looks like that. That's what I'm going to do, because that's what I do. And after a while, it got out of hand, and I basically just had to say, okay, all the Chromebooks, got to close them. We got to stop this. Right? I had to kind of stop the bleeding. And it took a lot of conversations about, okay, this is a good way to do this, right? And they would agree with me. This is fun. This is better than me handing you worksheets and saying, okay, go work on them, or giving you workbook pages, or standing up in front of the class and lecturing. All of those things maybe in moderation have their place, but they wanted to be able to have that sort of, and give very explicit instructions like, okay, we're going to all go into this Google presentation, this slide presentation, and I only want you to do this. Only go onto your slide. I want you to put your name right here, and I want you to write 2 sentences down here, and that's it. Don't do anything else. Don't go to anybody else's slides. And they understood that they were still sort of on a trial run getting back into this, and they didn't want to lose it. Partly because they had heard from previous classes that this was the way to go, and partly because they could see it on their own. And so it took a lot of, and it took a lot of conversation and a lot of kind of hand holding, but eventually we got there. And it was, I'll be honest, it was hard, and it was messy, and it was complicated, and it wasn't just let's go into class and let's do things exactly as I had planned. But you know what? I got in there and I knew that it was going to be messy, hard, and complicated, but I did it anyway. And I fear that sometimes in education, we get away from the messy and the hard and the complicated because it is messy and hard and complicated. But some of those things are worth doing, even if a lesson blows up in our face, or even if technology doesn't work the way that we want, or even if we get a reaction out of students that we didn't expect, because it's just like anything else. Sometimes the hard things are the things worth doing. And to be honest, my students' lives are messy and hard and complicated a lot of times. And what they really need is they need somebody to stand next to them in that mess that sometimes is their lives, and help them make sense of it and help them work through it. And I would much rather stand in the middle of their mess, not necessarily bad, if you ask me, even though it isn't the easiest and the most fun way to do things.
All right. Does anybody else have a question?
Can you kind of talk about how Dan Pink influenced your work?
Yes, I would love to talk. He did this TED Talk about motivation that I talk about in the book, and I was listening to it on my phone. I had an audio version of it on my phone, and I literally stopped my car and started taking notes whenever I heard this, just because it so just kind of blew my mind of ways that I could motivate. I was a swim coach at the time, and I was really looking for ways to motivate my swimmers. And I'm thinking autonomy, mastery, purpose. How can those three things come into my coaching as well as come into my teaching? And I mean, I kind of let it rummage around in my brain a little bit. I don't know that I came up with anything, really worth mentioning, but yeah, I mean, that was one of the first times that I really saw that if you can't remember what those are, autonomy, that's the generally, and you can see it I worded it a lot better in the book than I will right now, but autonomy is the ability to do something on your own, to have freedom. Mastery, to be able to do something at a high level, and then purpose, to be able to do something that's bigger than you. And so, I've really tried to grasp onto autonomy as much as I can with my students, but also whenever I lead professional development with teachers, I try to do that too, to give them the opportunity to go out and to pursue what's interesting to them as it relates back to the topic at hand. And because that's the way that I learn. I really learn on all three of those things personally. I like to be autonomous. I like to be able to do things on my own. I like to be able to master them, to do them at a high level. And I like them to be worth doing more than just the act of doing them. So, I've tried to incorporate those in the class as much as I can. I'll be totally honest, I'm not very good at giving kids control, at turning over control. I'm better than I was. I've started small, like whenever we have a vocabulary list of words in Spanish, I'll let the kids add new words and say, hey, what are some other words? It's like, we're going to write in Spanish anyway. We're going to talk in Spanish anyway, put them on the test. Or otherwise, I found that if I'm going to test them on them, they see it as double the work. They see it as me adding a whole bunch of extra words onto their vocabulary list, and then they want the optional list because those are the words that they want to know. Sometimes, I try to put as many of the words they want to know on the vocabulary list as I can anyway, but those are the ones that they want to know. And so they end up almost learning double the vocabulary because they have the extra, they had some autonomy on choosing it. So I don't know, those are some of the ways that it kind of touches in my class and how it's sort of affected me. So, yeah.
Anybody else?
Could I actually ask a question of the group?
Sure.
I'm just curious about your just sort of your thoughts on either on the sort of the technology side of it, of what are some things that have really changed your classroom technology wise, but then also with mindsets. In the book I talk about the way that we're thinking about education, the way that we do the craft of education, how that's changing. And so maybe how has technology changed your class, or how do you see education changing? Maybe, if anybody has anything about that, I'm curious.
Well, I worked at the junior high last year in special education, and one thing that I noticed was that a lot of my students have really little time writing, and they were very embarrassed individually on their Chromebooks was huge for them, because if they weren't embarrassed, they didn't have anybody else looking over any other things. It could just be me and them. I had to make comments, and they still had to go back and change the work. Because at first they're like, "Oh, great, you're going to edit it and do everything for me," and I'm like, "No, I'm going to put some comments in," and it took some time to kind of teach them how to use it. So I think sometimes people assume, "Oh, they're so tech savvy, they know how to use all these things."
Right.
And they didn't, but to be able to go through the writing process with them and just to see their confidence increase and have this really nice paper at the end and say, "Hey, I did this by myself," was really a game changer, because they went from absolutely hating English to being excited to work on things. And then I was able to have over. So we couldn't really do the Google Doc, but then we were able to use some of the ebook things online and go through that same process. We just kind of would sit together and do it. But it was really, really nice to see their self-confidence going, and for them to think, "Hey, I am doing the exact same thing as my friends in that class. I have the exact same grading expectations as them. Maybe a little longer, but I can do it." And that was really huge.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? That's great. And I see two things there. One, we were just talking about mastery, autonomy, and purpose from Dan Pink. And that's mastery right next day. And then a lot of times with me, those assignments go in the trash, or they end up, so that they make that connection right after. It's like right after the attempt, they get the instant feedback, and if they're in, I can't think of a better way to say it other than when they're in the moment of learning, if you can get them right then, I think that's huge. So great. I love it. Anybody else?
Well, go ahead.
I think we have a couple teachers in here that use Google Classroom, and they also have really, I think, realized the importance, and as they get more into it, just the collaborative nature of it, and that instant feedback that they're able to give students, and then also building off of that feedback, and like SE2R to give feedback, and then allowing students not to always put a grade on it so fast, but to allow that mastery learning. And I see that more and more in our school as we go one-to-one.
Yeah, you're right. So it's not so much that Google Classroom is the big thing, but it's what you're able to do with Google Classroom and the learning that comes out of it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Love it.
What you had said earlier, I know kind of when we first transitioned last year, I had heard a lot of teachers say, well, the kids are even chatting and this and that, and a lot of it was, okay, well, let's look at the classroom and how we have it set up. So, if my desk is seated in one area, guess what? Everybody, I need to see your screen, so you need to turn so that I can see your screen, so that I can see what, so they're held accountable that way too, because, they'll kind of turn it and message, okay, well, why is your screen turned? Obviously, turn it back. Let's practice the procedures, but I think when those expectations are made very clear to the students, they're consistent, a lot more learning can happen, and that was really neat to see by the end of last year. And it was actually kind of fun to see when the kids didn't want to stop working on their English papers, like after English. Well, we're in study hall right now. Can we keep doing this? Because they were actually engaged in that process.
That's a win right there. That's awesome. If you can get kids to say, I want to work on my English paper while they're outside of English and they're excited about it, something is going right, isn't it? That's great. I love it.
Well, I've noticed that whenever they make their work global, whenever they produce a product that they know it's going to go share it with global audience, they'll put so much more effort into whether it's an ebook or a blog or and I'm sure that's a little bit more for high school students, but
I totally agree with that. There's a teacher in Mexico City that I've connected with, and she's done some similar things to me with trying to get her classes connected to.
Oh, so we're losing you. I don't want to refresh.
And they would use.
Sorry, can you? We kind of lost you for a little bit.
Yeah, that's okay. What was the last thing you heard?
I thought we heard Wisconsin.
Did you say Wisconsin?
Yes. Okay. Yes, I did. So what I was.
That's why we were excited.
Yeah. That's right. Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, this teacher in Mexico City got connected with I think it was the University School of Milwaukee. And so they were able to do a Google Hangout, much like this. And so her students who spoke Spanish as their native language were learning English, and these kids in Milwaukee who were learning Spanish as their second language were able to have conversations. And she says, and this is to totally back up what you were saying, she said, in class, they didn't want to talk in English. They would revert back to Spanish, their native language, just because they didn't want to. But you got them on this Google Hangout.
Okay, lost you again.
With the kids in Milwaukee, the same. Losing them again. Did you hear that?
No, not really.
What did you hear?
That she got them on the Hangout, and then.
Okay. And she got them connected with these kids that were their exact same age, and all of this English starts spilling out of them, and they're wanting to talk in English even if they're making mistakes, and she couldn't get that. But you give them a global audience like that. You give them an audience of kids in another country, and that was brand new to them, and they wanted to bring their best. And so I think that's totally the truth.
Awesome. Just one more thing. Could you a little bit touch on how Twitter impacted your professional development as a teacher?
I would love to talk about that.
And then do you have your students tweeting? Do you have a
Ask Twitter account for just to tweet out what was going on in my class. My school district is still a little behind the times on Twitter. The most recent thing that the school board has passed, and this tells you how long ago it was, on social media was that the only approved form of social media in the classroom is My Big Campus. My Big Campus doesn't even exist anymore. So I think they're wanting to get into that a little bit more. So I've been sort of cautious with that. But as far as Twitter as an educator, I've said this 100 times and I'll say it again. Getting connected to other teachers and other ideas on Twitter was the single most important decision I've made in my career as an educator. And I'm not overstating that at all. Because as the entire world languages department at a small school, I didn't have other colleagues to bounce ideas off of. I had nobody I could go down the hall and talk to about teaching Spanish to high school kids. And so I had to find something. And I really struggled for the first few years and felt like I was all by myself. And I started to get connected on Twitter, and I started to find other educators like me, not just the ones that taught world languages, but also others that liked incorporating technology and didn't just want to do it for the sake of replacing something that they already did in class, that we wanted to do meaningful, relevant tech integration. And so I found them, and I'd find other people in my state through my state, the state Twitter hashtag. And so I started connecting and then seeing how other people were using things. And I would seriously, on some of them, I would sit there and go, why in the world would they do that? Or that sounds like a horrible idea, but everybody seems to be in favor of it. And I would, join in a Twitter chat, for example, where lots of people would come together at the same time and would tweet about the same subject. And I remember getting into one on standards-based grading.
Wednesday night. Sorry, we lost you.
Okay, what was the last thing you heard?
About standard-based grading.
Yes.
Wednesday night.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, you're familiar. And so I got into that, and this was real early on, and I'm going, well, these ideas, they would never work. This isn't possible. And so I just started asking some honest questions, and I got lots of, I think some people wanted to defend.
Sorry.
Standards were, I think some people wanted to defend it, and so they kind of jumped in, and it almost felt like a couple of them were attacking me, but I kind of tuned them out, and I listened to the ones that were wanting to help, and I got a whole new view of that and think, wow, this is a really cool thing. And so that's on my list of things to tackle in my classroom one of these days, and I have a new respect for it. I never would have even known about it. Nobody in my district was talking about it. So I mean, that kind of stuff, new tools, new blog posts. I compare being on Twitter as run down a big list of things. They probably don't have it. They have all sorts of crazy random things. And so being on Twitter is like Big Lots, because you never know exactly what you're going to find when you're out there. But then when you find it, it's the exact thing that you've been looking for. And you're so glad that you had it, but you never would have gone out searching for it. So those are some of the reasons why it's been so meaningful.
Giveaway.
Wow, awesome.
I know, isn't that awesome? So
yes, it is.
If you could pick a number from 1 to 24, two numbers from 1 to 24.
Two numbers from 1 to 24. Us to pick some random numbers. Does anybody want to come get on my video chat and help them? Okay, here we go. Come here. All right, you want to say hi?
Hi.
Do you want to tell them what your name is?
My name is Hallie.
Could you hear that okay?
Yes.
Here, wait, let me unplug my headphones. Let's see if we can hear. Okay. And then what grade are you going into?
Second.
She's going into second grade. Okay, so they need a number between 1 and 24. Can you just pick any number between 1 and 24?
14.
14. Krista Crawford.
Yay. They're giving away copies of my book based on those numbers. Okay, so here I'm going to introduce you to somebody else. You want to say bye?
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Here we go. This is my other daughter. You want to tell them what your name is?
Cassie,
And what grade are you going into?
4th.
Fourth. And what were you?
Wait, we're losing you.
Playing.
On Tropica on the Chromebook. See, we've got a Chromebook here too that she was playing with. So, all right. So, can you give them a number between 1 and 24 that's not 14?
12.
Yay!
Joel. Yay.
Sorry. I kill myself.
The number decided who got a copy of my book. So,
All right. Well,
Say bye.
thank you. Thank you so much.
yeah, my pleasure. Glad to help. And if anybody does get on Twitter or is on Twitter, feel free to reach out to me. I'm glad to share ideas or discuss or whatever. And all my contact information's in the back of the book. So if anybody ever wants to email me or whatever, I'm happy to stay connected.
Okay, thank you so much. It was an honor.
All right, my pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.